I walked into the hearing with a dented map tube under my arm and sea salt on my coat. The room hummed with whispers, the kind of small-town murmur that says we've already picked a side. A red sticker on the projector cart read Unsafe, like it had already been decided for me. On the front row, the HOA president relaxed into his tan like a man on a yacht, and my son avoided my eyes. The chairwoman tapped her gavel and said, "We'll begin with parcel 17B, condemnation and demolition." The word demolition echoed like a gull under the rafters. I set the tube on the table and unrolled a century of paper in one slow breath. The room smelled like iodine and toner. "This is the 1904 title survey," I said, and even the smirker in the second row stopped smirking because they could hear it in my voice. I used to draw maps for a living. I used to fix the world with a pencil and a bearing. I clipped the corners to the projector, and the screen filled with a coastline that wasn't the one they'd been selling each other over coffee. When the overlay snapped into place, you could hear the hinge of the whole town creak. Their lot line drifted over pale blue, a sliver of the Atlantic labeled public trust, not private, not yours, title. I traced the mean high watermark with my finger so the back row could see the edge where the ocean gets to say no. Caldwell leaned forward like he could will the waterline back with his cologne. My son's fiance whispered something about "this can't be real," and a clerk already had a handset to her mouth. "We're showing a chain of title conflict on 17B. I kept my eyes on the map, on the part that had always been true, and said, "You measured my life in square feet. I measured yours in mean high water." The room went quiet in that unsettled way that makes people fidget with pens. I didn't need the gavel. The tide had spoken. And if they wanted to know how an old woman with a cane could walk into a room full of people who thought they'd already won and say no, I could tell them. But to understand that morning, you have to see the week I lived before it and the years I earned that map tube. My name is Nora Whitfield. I'm 71, retired from the city's mapping office, and I live where the morning fog sticks to your sweater and the gulls remind you who really owns the air. I drink my coffee from a chipped ceramic mug with a faded lobster claw on the side. I keep a broken compass on my windowsill, the kind with a brass lid and a needle that still remembers north, even when it wants to jitter south. The cottage I live in is a small shingled thing on a narrow lane with a stone wall the color of winter. It is not fancy. It is right. The week before the hearing, a red sticker appeared on my front gate overnight, like a rash. Unsafe. Then came two men in fluorescent vests who took pictures of my porch and measured my stairs without saying hello. And one of them set a metal tape across my kitchen doorway and called out numbers I didn't ask for. Later, a letter with the town seal told me my home had been flagged for condemnation under emergency authority. There was a meeting. There would be a vote. I stood in my kitchen with the letter and the sound of the radio talking about weather somewhere else, and I felt the old familiar tremor at the base of my thumb that shows up when I'm holding something I can't fix. My son, Evan, called on speaker as if he was calling into a show. "Mom, we heard. Riley and I are already on it." "On what?" I asked, staring at the black and white photograph of my husband on the shelf, him in a wool cap the year before his chest turned to fog. "On helping," Evan said, "on getting you into something safer. Caldwell says the HOA is concerned. It's not personal." "Who is Caldwell to you?" I said, and the way Evan paused told me I'd hit the soft wood under the paint. "He's the HOA president, and Mom, he knows people. This is how these things get handled. And look, Riley's design pilot is in talks with a streaming network. If we move fast, we can feature the renovation. It's good optics for you." The red sticker says demolition. Demolition isn't renovation. That's just the first step they have to take legally, he said, in the voice of a man who once sold paper mortgages and now sells confidence. We'll make calls. A new build would be worth triple. You could live closer to us. No more wind off the bay. It's a win. Whose win? I asked, but he was already promising to call me back. The line clicked, and I stood in the center of my kitchen like a landmark that someone forgot to draw, with the kettle on low and the smell of salt drying on the window screen. They were efficient, I will give them that. The sticker turned into a file number. The file number turned into a notice, and the notice invited me to speak about my unsafe home in 3 minutes or less. A neighbor texted to ask if I needed a couch. A second neighbor left a casserole on my step like grief. Riley sent me a mood board. Coastal renovation, she called it, with photographs of rooms where nothing had ever been wet. That afternoon, I took my cane and walked to the edge of the lane where the stones hold the ocean like the bowls of 2 wrinkled hands. The tide had just turned. The clamors were dots against the slate. When the wind blows the right way in our town, the bells on the moorings ring out of sequence, and you can convince yourself the ocean is a choir. I listened. I thought about lines. And then I thought about my husband's field notebook, the one he'd kept under our bed in a shoebox the color of dust. He wasn't a cartographer. He poured concrete and set rebar and believed in structures that stayed where you put them. But he'd kept notes when he helped a neighbor petition for a seawall variance 15 years ago. What he wrote then would matter now, even if he never got to see it land. In my living room, the shoebox still smelled like his winter coat. The rubber band around the notebook split like old spaghetti. The pages crackled. On the 3rd page, there it was, a simple sketch of the shore with a clean line he'd labeled MHW 1904 and a little circle with an arrow that said, "Bolt on granite north of Lobsterman's Shed." He'd written another note in block letters, the kind he used when he wanted me to see it. Check bearings versus deed calls. It had felt like a conversation he'd started and trusted me to finish. I took the bus to the county records office because I didn't trust my hands on the wheel that morning. The clerk at the counter looked like the kind of person who knows exactly where an old plat is, but enjoys watching people ask twice. Her name tag read reception. The woman behind her, with the short black ponytail and a NASA sticker on her water bottle, waved me over like I was late for something fun. "You Nora?" she asked, as if we'd already spoken. "I am," I said. "I'm looking for coastal plats 1900 to 1910, especially any survey that references mean high water near Smelt Lane." She said, "I'm Anna, records tech. I am absolutely the nerd you need." She said it quietly, with the conspiratorial tone of a person who has fallen in love with paper no one else wants. She led me into a room that hummed like a refrigerator and smelled like heat on dust. In the back, there was a flat file cabinet that probably had been new during the Eisenhower administration. She pulled open a drawer and ran her fingers along a stack of linen plats like she was flipping records. "Here," she said, sliding one out. "Coastline Survey, 1904. It's a composite, but they stamped the benchmark locations." We set the plat on the light table and clipped it lightly. The corners were crisp, the way old paper gets when it forgets how to be fiber and decides to be shell. There were tiny printed circles along the shore with numbers that meant little to most people and everything to me. On the second column, in pencil so faint I had to lean, someone had written "Bolt in granite north of Shed." Whoever penciled this saved me an hour of swearing. Anna grinned. She said, "We have a scanner," and held her hand to the belly of an old flatbed like it was a living thing. She scanned the plat and then pulled a modern parcel map on her screen.
The software sucked air for a moment, and then she did something with 2 fingertips that made the past slide over the present. The lines didn't agree, not entirely. The old mean high water mark grazed a corner of parcel 17B that the modern map treated like a deck. The modern line had been drawn a half degree off, or someone had been lazy with a compass. "You see it, right?" she asked, though she already knew I did. "I feel it in my left thumb. That's where the bad bearings live." She laughed. "You and me both."
My house has been flagged as unsafe, I said, like I was telling her a weather report. I need to be able to stand in a room and show people who don't want to look that some of what they think is theirs belongs to the ocean, and some of what they think is ugly belongs to me. "Then you need the overlay," she said, typing fast. "And you need to find that bolt." She zoomed the 1904 index and turned the brightness down until the pencil annotation glowed. "North of the shed. There used to be a shed." "There still is," I said. "It belongs to a man who thinks the ocean is a hobby." At low tide, the harbor turns into a study in humility. The boats kneel. The rocks remember what the water was covering for them. Anna met me by the granite lip with a canvas bag on her shoulder and a measuring rod in her hand. "This is ridiculous," she said happily. "I love it." "Stay above the kelp," I told her. "The first rule of shore work is don't trust seaweed." We walked the line between light and dark. On a flat of granite the size of a dining table, a shallow circle glinted through the green slime like a pupil. I scrubbed it with a wire brush I'd stolen from my own porch, and the circle turned into a countersunk bolt whose head was stamped with a star. Someone had painted over it once. The paint had peeled until it made its own contour lines. Anna held the rod upright and I held the prism, and for a moment we were the only 2 points in the world that knew exactly where we were. "This is beautiful," she said. "This is the kind of beautiful that can get you yelled at," I said, and thought about the hearing. That evening, I found the anonymous complaint. It had been left in a place where people leave things when they want to pretend they didn't leave them. The email traced back to the HOA office. It wasn't hard, not for a woman who's followed lines her whole life. They said my foundation was spalling and my steps were rot, and the electrical panel was a tragedy. The photographs were of my neighbor's porch. The complaint was a cut and paste job with my name. I printed it. I printed 3 copies. I underlined the part where they spelled Whitfield with 2 T's. In none of my files have I ever been 2 T's. Evan and Riley came by that night with takeout and plans. Riley's hair was pulled into a perfect coil like a thought she wasn't going to let go of. She opened her laptop and rotated it toward me as if she were selling me a kitchen. "Season arc," she said. "We start with a heartbreaking teardown, salt-worn, unsafe, a danger to its owner, but with good bones. We follow the paper trail. We honor the past. We rebuild on the footprint with sustainable materials. We bring you home." I looked at Evan, who had his hand on her elbow like a man holding an idea he hoped wouldn't fly away. I asked him, "Do you know what the word footprint means?" "It means we respect the shape," Riley said. "We can't expand into the setback, but we can raise, we can open, we can make the light find you." "It also means the tide finds you," I said, "if the footprint is wrong." "What footprint?" Evan asked, and he asked it like I was being difficult, not like I was saving him. I slid the printouts across the table. I said the complaint that flagged me as unsafe came from the HOA office. It used my neighbor's porch to accuse mine of falling apart. And the parcel line on the modern map is drawn half a degree wrong. There is a tidal benchmark that says where the ocean gets to speak, and your friend Caldwell's map ignores it. Riley's smile stiffened like frosting in a draft.
She said, maps get redrawn all the time. That's progress. I said, maps get corrected. That's civilization. I put my hand on the folder like a shield. No one is demolishing my house without knowing where the water line belongs. Evan exhaled that tired exhale men use when they think you're too stubborn to join the team. Mom, you're making this harder than it has to be. There's money in this for you, for us. Caldwell's brought in investors. I signed a guarantee on a deposit to lock a contractor. If this falls through...
You signed what? I asked. On whose future? On ours, he said, and he meant his own. It's just paper. And paper, I said, is what saves us when memory fails. The next morning, a contractor in a new truck put yellow tape around my front steps and marked a red X on the clapboard like he was culling a deer. I removed the tape and made tea. He put it back and took a photo. I held up the letter I'd drafted for the code office requesting a temporary restraining order based on a pending title conflict and a documented error in deed calls. He said I was welcome to send my little letter wherever I wanted. I sent it to the clerk and to the town's attorney and to the title insurer named on the covenants for 3 of the adjacent homes, because sometimes truth is a matter of CC. Anna sent me a message. You're going to need expert testimony. She followed it with a second. I called a friend, title counsel. Name's Pembroke. He's direct. Direct, as it turns out, means a man who answers his cell on the second ring and says your last name as if he's known it longer than you have. Whitfield, he said. What you've got is either a misunderstanding or a fraud. Either way, we don't like it. I don't need you to like it, I said. I need you to confirm it. He chuckled once. No warmth, only respect for the sentence. Send me the overlay, he said. Send me the 1904 scan. Send me the deed, the covenants, the HOA charter, and the complaint. Anonymous complaint, I said. Nothing anonymous when it comes to money, he said. I sent the files. I printed 3 more copies because I learned the hard way that printers taste fear. Then I sat by my window and watched the lane and waited for the neighbor kids to walk past on their way to the pier. And I told myself this was not about winning. This was about standing where you said you would stand. The temporary restraining order came in the afternoon like a bandage for something that should not have been cut. The code office agreed to pause enforcement pending a public hearing to review the boundary and the complaint. They stapled a copy to the town bulletin board, the way people staple lost cats. I went and read it there anyway with my hand on my cane, while a teenager with a skateboard read it over my shoulder and said, "That's metal." I told him metal is how you anchor a benchmark to granite. He said that was cooler than he expected an old lady to say. I told him the ocean likes old ladies who know how to read it. Caldwell did not like the TRO. He called me, finally, without charm. We could have done this the easy way, he said, as if he'd ever chosen an easy thing that didn't improve his own view. The easy way often skips the truth, I said. The truth is a dangerous word for people with rotten steps. Those photographs are my neighbors, and I let the silence sit. This is a formality, he said. The hearing, we'll share our engineer's report, the board will vote, you'll be safer for it. I keep using that word safer. I don't think it means what you think it means. He hung up without a goodbye, which is as close as men like that come to admitting you've inconvenienced their story. Riley posted an Instagram reel that night. The caption read, "When a tired cottage needs a second life." The B-roll showed a sweep of my shingles, the red X bright like blood, and then a cut to a tablet rendering of something glassy with white sofas. The comments were hearts and hammers, and one person whose aunt had once lived on my street wrote, "That house has been there longer than my knees." I turned off my phone and made soup and watched the fog pull itself together over the bay like a woman adjusting her coat in a mirror. Marisol Chen, a reporter with handwriting I respected, left a card in my mailbox the next morning. Community Affairs, it said. Call if you want sunlight. I called. She came with a notebook and the kind of curiosity that isn't a weapon. She asked me to tell the story starting with the shoebox. She asked me to show her the bolt. She stood on the granite with her jeans cuffed and took a photograph of the star-stamped head and said there are people who think the ocean is decoration. I told her I married a man who taught me better.
"Will you go on the record about the complaint?" she asked. "I will go on the record about the truth," I said. "The complaint will be what it is." Evan texted me at midnight. "Caldwell says you're grandstanding. He says you're embarrassing me." He didn't add a question mark. I answered anyway. "I am saving you from a guarantee you can't pay and a man who is allergic to the word boundary." At dawn, I printed the overlay in color so the blue would shine under the fluorescent lights of the town hall. I packed the map tube with the 1904 scan and the modern parcel map and the field notes that still smelled like my husband's coat. I wore my gray sweater with the elbow patch he sewed onto it, crooked because he had large hands and little patience for small work. On my way out the door, I touched the compass on the windowsill with one finger and said, "Don't let me lie," because men and women who draw lines for a living know the cost of a lazy degree. You already know what happened when I unrolled the map. You heard the room, you saw the overlay, the way the old mean high watermark crossed that smug corner of the world like a parent moving a sleeping child from a couch to a bed. But you didn't see the clerk tilt her head and say into the radio, "We need title." And you didn't see Pembroke walk in exactly 3 minutes later like a man who had been waiting for a cue. He set his satchel down without asking permission and said, "I'm counsel for the title insurer on the adjacent parcels. We'd like to be heard." Caldwell shifted in his chair like his boat had taken wake. The chairwoman, who taught 3rd grade for 30 years and knew how to let a man talk himself into the corner he'd built, nodded. "Briefly," she said.
Pembroke did not do brief. He did exact. He placed 2 documents on the table with the tenderness of someone laying out instruments. This is the original deed that describes the bearing and distance of the water line along what is now called Parcel 17B, he said. And this is the deed from the shell company that acquired a sliver of shoreline last year through a purported quitclaim. The second document references a bearing that does not match any survey on file, and the complaint that initiated the condemnation appears to have originated from the office of a party with a financial interest in the outcome. We don't insure fraud, we don't insure error, and we don't insure over the ocean. Caldwell smiled the way men do when they are about to perform reasonableness. With respect, title counsel is overreaching. This is a simple matter of code, an unsafe structure, a replacement plan. Anna stood from the back row and cleared her throat. The chairwoman gestured. Anna spoke in the careful tempo of a person who has practiced being heard. As records tech, I compared the 1904 title survey to the current parcel map. The mean high watermark, as established by state practice and NOAA reference, intersects the southwest corner of 17B. I personally verified the presence of the 1904 benchmark bolt at low tide with Mrs. Whitfield yesterday. The overlay print shows the conflict. The complaint contains photographs that are not of Mrs. Whitfield's property. The metadata shows the images were taken in front of number 11 Smelt Lane, not number 9 Smelt Lane. My son's face did something I hadn't seen since he was 10. The look of a boy who just found the marble he thought he'd lost forever and realized it was a berry bead, and he'd been chasing the wrong shine. Riley stared at the projector like it had betrayed her. This is the thing about overlays. When you put the truth on top of the story becomes the shadow. The chairwoman leaned toward me. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, "do you wish to speak to the safety of your home?"
I did. I said, yes. I said, I have lived in that cottage for 42 years through storms that named themselves and storms that didn't. The clapboard is solid. The foundation has weathered in place like a good jaw. The stairs were rebuilt 5 summers ago by my neighbor, who is careful with his hands. If you want to flag me for a loose railing, I will fix the railing. If you want to condemn me based on a complaint filed from a friend's office with pictures of someone else's front steps, I will ask why. If you want to draw a line through my living room that moves the ocean, I will bring you a bolt. Caldwell tried again. This is personal for her, he said, as if that made it less true. I said it is personal for the ocean, and laughter cracked the room in a way that wasn't unkind. The chairwoman tapped her gavel gently. We will recess for 30 minutes, she said. Counsel, records tech, and code officer will meet in the side room. In the hallway, Evan caught up to me like a man late for a train. Mom, he said, I didn't know about the bearings. I didn't know about the complaint. Caldwell told me this was routine. He said we'd lose our chance if we waited. Did you sign a personal guarantee? I asked, because apologies are for later and facts are for now. He looked down, which I will always respect more than a man who pretends his neck is stiff. Yes, he said. I thought the investors would cover it. Then they asked me to backstop the deposit. Riley said we needed to show commitment. We'll talk about the math of that later, I said. For now, stand where you won't be in the way of the tide. Riley approached, the corners of her mouth trembling at the effort it took not to turn down. Nora, she said, which was the first time she had used my name like I owned it. We didn't mean for it to get ugly. This is not ugly, I said. Ugly is pretending the ocean is furniture. Ugly is taking a picture of someone else's front steps because you can't make your argument without lying. She flushed in a way that had nothing to do with cameras. I just wanted a story that worked, she said. So write one where the truth gets to keep its job. In the side room, Pembroke spoke low and slow, and even Caldwell's lawyer, who had been leaning on his perfect tie like a crutch, took notes. When they came back out, the chairwoman held the microphone like a history teacher about to correct a rumor. We have decided to lift the emergency condemnation, she said. We will open an inquiry into the complaint process and the origin of the anonymous filing. The board will accept the records overlay into the file and will request a formal survey to reconcile the mean high watermark. The demolition is stayed. It wasn't victory. It was a pause. But some pauses hold more water than they look like they can. On the steps of the town hall, Marisol held her notebook and said, "Can I quote you?" I said she could. "Tell me," she said, "what is this really about?" It's about not letting other people draw you smaller. It's about the line that is not for sale. She smiled, which is different from a reporter saying thank you. It's a person saying, we might be on the same side of the human experiment. Caldwell walked past us, smelling like a department store and something hot. Enjoy your reprieve. You can't stop a tide of progress. Progress that erases the public is a riptide. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. Men like that do a lot of not turning and expect the world to pivot for them.
A week passed. The overlay made the rounds of inboxes that prefer not to admit how long they sit unread. Evan came by with a bag of groceries, like a boy on his first day of contrition. He chopped carrots in my kitchen like he was confessing with a knife. "I'm sorry," he said, not looking up. "I wanted a bigger life. I wanted to be a person who fixed things and made money, and you wanted to be someone who gets to come in after the hard part is done and make it pretty," I said, "because he is my son and I have earned the right to tell him the version of himself he should be careful of. There is nothing wrong with pretty if it is honest. There is plenty wrong with pretty that steals." He nodded and wiped his eyes with the back of his wrists, which made him look 12 in a way that ached.
Pembroke says I may be liable for the guarantee. Riley says we can sell the pilot without this house, but we need a win. You need a boundary, I said. Wins come and go. Boundaries keep you. He looked at the broken compass on my sill and said, "That old thing still works?" "Most days," I said. "On the other days, you look up and find the big things, the sun, the tide, the truth, and use them to check your needle." The formal survey day was bright enough to be rude. The crew set their tripod like a three-legged animal and marked points that made the map in their screen unspool. They found the bolt again and took care to note it as something more than a rumor. They brought their own overlay, and when it matched ours within the margin of regret, the youngest of them grinned like he'd been allowed to be part of a magic trick. The title insurer sent a letter to the HOA asking for documents related to any quit claims, easements, or boundary adjustments affecting parcels 17 through 17D. The ask was neat, almost polite. The letter had a tone I recognized from my own better days. Show your work. Caldwell produced a quitclaim that had been filed on a Friday afternoon, an hour before closing time, with a stamp bearing a reference to survey that did not exist. When Pembroke called the number for the notary, the voice on the line belonged to a man who had notarized 6 documents that day, none of which he could describe. Marisol's article ran under the fold with a headline that used the word boundary without making it cute. The subhead said, HOA complaint tied to officer, public trust line at issue. No outrage, no exclamation points, just a steady light. People read it on their porches. People read it in their cars. People brought it to the bait shop and said, "Huh," which in this town is a flare. Riley posted a story of her picking up trash on the shoreline in expensive boots. The comments were not generous. She sent me a message I did not answer. It read, "You win." I wasn't playing that game.
The second hearing drew more people, 'cause fear and curiosity are siblings who travel well. On my way in, a boy with a skateboard asked if he could see the bolt again later. I told him he could, but only if he brought a friend, because teaching is a kind of anchoring. Inside, the chairwoman opened the meeting with the kind of deep breath you take before liftoff. "We will address Parcel 17B, she said. "We will hear from Title Counsel and the Code Officer and the public. We will keep our voices like we keep our town, reasonable until there's a reason not to be." Pembroke explained the difference between moving a fence and moving a coast. He explained mean high water in a sentence so clean you could eat off it. He explained that public trust lands are not a suggestion and that a quitclaim cannot give you what the ocean does not allow you to own. He held up the notary's record and laid it next to the complaint email origin and asked the board to consider the possibility that the condemnation had been used as a pry bar to leverage a profitable teardown. Caldwell's lawyer objected to the word profitable. The chairwoman allowed it. Some truth needs to be paid for twice. Anna spoke next, and my heart did a small thing in my chest I will not cheapen with metaphor. She had learned how to keep her voice low and sure in a room that prefers its women nicer than that. She described the overlay, the benchmark, the metadata on the complaint images, and the chain of title discrepancy. She said the word discrepancy like a bell. It rang. The code officer, who had the decency to look at his shoes, said he would withdraw his unsafe designation pending inspection. He apologized for the photographs. He said he relied on the complaint process to be honest. He said he would do better. I believed him because men who apologize to the floor are often one good conversation away from a better life. Caldwell spoke last. He had trimmed his beard and his patience. He insisted that none of this was personal. He insisted that his office had only acted as a conduit for community concerns. He said the complaint had been forwarded to him by a concerned citizen who did not wish to be named. He implied that I had manipulated the press. He implied that I had manipulated my son. He implied that the tide would find me wherever I stood, which was the first true thing he said all day. "Sir," the chairwoman said, "did your office submit the complaint?" He looked at his lawyer, who looked back at him as if to say, "We talked about this. We transmitted it."
From whose account, she asked. He did not answer. It was answer enough.
The board voted to lift the condemnation, to refer the complaint for review, to request a state survey to reconcile the public trust boundary, and to remove Caldwell as chair pending the outcome. The gavel fell like a small boat on a quiet morning. Not triumphant, sufficient. After, in the parking lot, where good news dissolves into errands, Evan hugged me with his whole body, like you remembered how. I almost lost you, he said into the wool of my sweater, and I knew he meant more than the house. Riley stood a distance away, her hands in the pockets of a coat that cost more than my first car. And when our eyes met, she looked down. She came over and offered me a crisp apology that sounded like it had been workshopped. I told her she should apologize to the ocean. If you make something, I said, make something that lets people see where they are, not what you wish was there. She nodded and said she was stepping back from the pilot. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she meant for now. I wished her well, because there are only so many ways to be a person, and I try not to leave any of them worse than I found them. Pembroke shook my hand and said, "You did the heavy lifting." I told him a bolt we didn't set did it for us. He smiled just enough to get it. The inspector came to my cottage the next morning without theatrics. He tapped the railing with a knuckle and said, "Loose." I said, "I'll tighten it." He checked the panel and said, 10 years old? I said, 9.5. He said, "Looks 9.5. He signed a note and left me with a recommendation to repaint the back steps before winter took offense. I told him I would. I meant it. Evan brought over a list he'd made with a pencil. The list read, sell extra truck, call investors, unwind guarantee, part-time gig at the credit union. Humble work, he said, like a benediction and a dare he'd finally take. I was good at talking people into buying air. Maybe I can help them understand paper. I said, you can help them read lines. You can help them ask where the ocean is. He helped me carry a bundle of shingles from the shed and put them on the sawhorses, like little gray books. He worked without talking for a while. Then he said, when Dad died, I thought I had to be the one who made everything bigger. I thought small meant failure. I said, you were a boy. Boys think size is the same as safety. Men learn the difference. He nodded and cut a shingle in a perfect straight line and looked surprised by his own hands. He said, I forgot I know how to do things. We all forget. Then we make a list. Marisol came by once more, not with a notebook, but with her kid, who wanted to see the bolt. We walked to the granite, and there it was, patient as ever. The kid crouched and touched the star with one finger like it would bite. Why is it here? He asked. To tell us where here is, I said. Why didn't they see it before? He asked. They weren't looking, I said, or they were looking at something they wanted instead. He thought about that for a long time, in the way only children and people who haven't forgotten how to think do. So, if you don't know where you are, he said, you should ask the ocean. Yes, I said, or your mother. In the end, the state survey came back, and the line was drawn where the old survey and the bolt had said it should be. Parcel 17B's southwest corner kissed the public trust boundary. No decks would be hanging into blue. No glass boxes would be pretending they owned sun. The quitclaim evaporated in the light. Caldwell resigned without a speech. Riley filmed something inland with a barn and a lot of white paint. Evan paid down the guarantee in stubborn installments and learned to like the word enough. I replaced the back steps and tightened the railing like a person who does not need a committee to tell her what she already knows.
On a clear Saturday, I hosted a small thing in my yard where the street dead ends into the edge of the world. I set out lemonade and bowls of blueberries and paper plates. I asked Anna to bring the scanned plat so the kids could see what old paper looks like when it's been in the dark long enough. The boy with the skateboard came with 2 friends because he understood assignments. Marisol brought a pie. Pembroke sent a note that said, "When maps win, we all do." When the sun slid down the siding like a hand finding its pockets, I stood up and said a few words because someone asked and because I have learned to take up the space the truth offers me. I said, "We are a small place. That is not a failing. That is a scale that lets us hold each other to account. The ocean has boundaries. So do we. If you want to move a line, bring a bolt." Later, in the quiet that belongs to people who have earned it, I sat in my chair with the compass on the sill and the map tube slouched against the wall like a tired friend. The kettle ticked. The floor remembered my husband's boots. Evan washed dishes in my sink because he likes to. I wrote a note, the kind I wish someone had handed me when I was in my 30s and thought being loud was the same as being right. I left it on the kitchen table for him and for whoever sits at this table after me. It read, "Boundaries are love with edges. Draw them clean. Redraw them when you learn better. Don't outsource your courage. If a person offers you a win that requires erasing someone else's home, ask what tide you've stepped into. If an office tells you it's anonymous, ask who benefits. If you feel small, find the bolt and stand there until you don't. The ocean will move. So will you. That's not the danger. The danger is believing you can own what was meant to be shared. The safety is remembering you are part of the map." I turned off the light, and the cottage did what cottages do when the weather plays nice. It exhaled. Outside, the buoys knocked their old songs against the docks, and the gulls laughed at nothing because joy doesn't always need a reason. The tide came in on time, as if it had been invited, as if it had somewhere important to be. I slept, and when I dreamed, I was standing on granite with my hand on a star and a sky the color of slate saying, "Thank you." I believed it meant me. In the months after, a few people came by with plats and photographs and questions about fences and hedges and marriages. They told me stories about neighbors and corners, and one small shed a man had slipped 3 feet toward the view because he thought no one would notice. I did not become a consultant. I became something better, a person who asks, "Where is your line? Do you have a bolt? Can we find it together?" Sometimes when the fog holds the sound just right, I hear a gull and think it is my husband clearing his throat in the way he always did when he was about to say something he'd been saving. I like to think he would have liked the way we found our way back to the oldest map in town and made the present fit it without breaking anything that didn't deserve to be broken. I like to think he would have looked at Evan and said, "Son, being big is not the same as being true." Evan reads the note at my table sometimes, like a prayer. He keeps a small compass in his pocket now. He says he takes it out in parking lots and asks himself where he is, not just on the map, but in his day. He said I could quote him on that. I told him quotes work best when you've shared a pie. Anna got a raise she didn't ask for because she doesn't know how to ask for things that make other people think she thinks she's better than them. I told her to frame the letter anyway. Marisol wrote a follow-up column called "Public Means Us," and the comment section was mostly civil, which, where we live, passes for a parade. I still keep the map tube by the door. It is a talisman now, not a threat. If I live long enough to forget some of the names I love, I hope I remember the weight of that paper and the ink that turned my fear into an outline, and the way a room full of people got quiet when the ocean put its finger on the table and said, "Here." I hope I remember that some mornings you wake up and discover that the smallest thing you did, walking into a hearing with a tube and a sentence, is a thing that made the day make sense. On warm evenings, I carry a lawn chair to the granite where the bolt still shines when the light remembers it. The boy with the skateboard, no longer a boy, now with a car and a dent on the passenger side, will sometimes show up with a friend and say, "Tell it again." I do. I begin with the smell of old paper and the sound of a room preparing to ignore a woman, and the way a line drawn 120 years ago saved a home and a piece of the world that belongs to all of us. I end with this. Not every fight is a map fight, but more of them are than you think, because most harm begins with a line moved quietly, and most repair begins when someone says, "No, here." The night before the first real storm of winter, Evan and I boarded the windows the way you're supposed to, with patience and the right screws. We checked the gutters. We tied down the grill because last year the wind had picked it up and set it down 2 houses away, and we still owe someone a burger. We stood on the lane and tasted snow in the air. "You think the ocean forgave us?" he asked. "I don't think she keeps score," I said. "I think she keeps time." We went inside and made stew and sat at the table with the compass between us like a coin we were flipping to decide something good. When the wind hit after midnight and the house swayed in that way that tells you both that you are small and that you are placed, I slept. And when morning came and the shingles were still where we left them and the railing did what a railing should and the bolt did what a bolt has always done, I wrote one more line on the note on my table in a hand that trembles mostly when it needs to. If you are lucky, your last address will be a boundary worth keeping. If you are lucky, you will spend your days learning how to do that without hating anybody who tried to erase it.
The tide went out. The tide came in. The town went on. People checked their mail. Someone painted a porch the wrong blue, and their neighbor forgave them because forgiveness is cheaper than lawyers. The chairwoman retired after one last careful meeting in which she taught a room full of people how to speak without raising their voices. Anna trained a kid who will be better at the software than any of us and told him to go find the oldest paper when the newest paper lies. Pembroke took up fly fishing and sent me a picture of a trout he did not catch with a note that said, "The river belongs to her, too." On a Sunday, when the sky couldn't decide what to do, I took out the map one last time and ran my hand along the mean high water line like a woman memorizing a friend's face. I rolled it tight. I slid it back into the tube. I leaned it where I could see it when I needed to. Then I made tea and sat by my window and watched the gull hover in one spot for a miraculous amount of time, a lesson in balance disguised as curiosity. And I thought, mark your place, check your bearings, carry your bolt. The rest is weather. And if you're watching this because you found the thumbnail with a red sticker and a map tube and the line that looked like trouble, leave a comment telling me about the first time you learned where your boundary was. Tell me who taught you. Tell me if you've ever moved it the wrong way and moved it back. Somebody else will read what you wrote and think, maybe I can carry my own map into the room. Maybe I can say here and mean it. That's all I wanted the morning I walked into that hearing. Not to win, to mean it, and to leave behind a coastline that could survive another 100 years of people who think progress is whatever lets them forget the tide. I am Nora Whitfield. I measure with tide and thumb and paper, and I live where the ocean tells the truth. If you ever need to borrow a map, I have one that works. If you ever need to borrow a sentence, try this one. You measured my life in square feet. I measured yours in mean high water.